Welcome to UI Mondays. I want to talk about React 18 because the new RC just dropped. So we're going to chill. We're going to chat about what's coming in React 18 based on the release candidate that's out now. We're going to upgrade the Kendo demo to the new React version. And yeah, that's it. UI Mondays. Should be a good time. We got some big news. I'm going to say it was 5 days ago now, because it was maybe the 8th. I want to say it was the 8th. So longer than that. We learned that the new React 18 release candidate was out, which is what you see. You see the RC being thrown around. That's like we had an alpha, we had a beta, now we're in RC. That means that in just a few weeks, I believe they said 2 to 4 weeks, we will have the final like production ready, put it in all your apps version of React 18, which is super cool because it's been a couple years actually since we had a React release. I'm trying to think of when. I believe it was October 2020 that we got React 17. And that was really interesting because it was kind of they called it like the no feature release. Because there wasn't a lot of new stuff to play with. There were a lot of fixes and there was a lot of stuff that like laid some good groundwork, made it a lot more stable, made it a lot more like, it did make improvements, but there weren't like new features for devs to go play with. So after that kind of, I don't want to call it underwhelming because it was a good release. It just wasn't like a fun release, it wasn't like, ooh, look at all this new stuff we get in React 17, the same way that it really is like, ooh, look at all this new stuff we get with React 18. So it's been interesting to kind of see. I feel like we're finally seeing the stuff that they like were laying the groundwork for in 2020. And I'm sure some of the reason it took so long is that, there's been a pandemic, there's been some stuff happening that may or may not have disrupted the way people work, just a skosh. So after all of that, it's really, really cool to see a new React release, and I'm excited about it. It's got some really neat stuff in it. And if you've kind of been following along, we've been actually able to see a lot of what's been going into the work of this release, which is really cool. It's been really like transparent. And I don't want to say that it's in a way that other people don't do, because I'll level with you. I'm not following what's happening with the releases of other frameworks just because I'm in it with React. I don't have time to keep up with everything. So maybe like Angular's been doing this the whole time. And if so, kudos to them. But I really loved the approach that the React team took with the React working group. And I hadn't ever seen anything like that before. And it's been just really, really neat to watch those discussions happen like in the open, in a space that anybody can like poke their head into and reread and like follow along. And I've definitely enjoyed being able to do that. For those of you that have not necessarily been keeping as close an eye on everything React as I have, the working group is comprised of people from all over. So they're certainly members of the official React team, but then also like people who maintain React libraries, people who are new to the React space, like large businesses that use React in like an enterprise way, people that build with React on like just their own teams. And they are all together in the working group and are able to contribute ideas and like test and discuss and whatever. And all of that has been happening in public, basically in like a public discussion hub. Let me see if I can find the website. React working group. That's me singing as I Google. So yeah, here in the chat, I'll put it, and I will share my screen. Intentionally this time. So yeah, we've had the working group here, and it's a GitHub discussions page. But we can see like everything. It's honestly, it's often more information than I actually wanted. which was cool. But that means that when you do want to go look something up, there's like a 99.99% chance that someone has already been talking about it in the working group. And it's been just so cool to be able to like poke your head and see what's happening in the working group. There's also something I really liked in here. We had a really great, there it is. They had this really cool glossary and explain like in 5 discussion. It's going to work to the new features that are coming to us. And so to have some of this stuff just totally out in the open and accessible and broken down in a way that makes sense, because like hydration was one that was new to me, not something that I had ever worked with. Same with like suspense and some of the new like concurrent things, which I'm feeling a little bit better now. I've like read a bunch and I've like written some blogs and stuff, and I'm feeling a little bit like I've got, at least at a high level, the idea of concurrency and concurrent rendering under my belt. I have yet to write anything that takes advantage of those concurrent features. We'll play around with that later today, because I'm going to update the Kendo demo app to React 18, or at least to the React 18 RC, and we'll see. There's actually not a lot that's like super stateful in the Kendo demo app, because it was made to just like show off UI components. So maybe we'll have to add a little bit of state, add a little bit of something so that we can play with concurrent rendering. But yeah, if there are any terms or any pieces of React 18 that don't feel like they're making sense, this article or this discussion, 10 out of 10. I've opened this page like 1,000 times, but I got off on a tangent. I was talking about the working group, which is in and of itself very cool. So yeah, you can check them out here, GitHub, React Working Group / React 18, and then in the discussions tab, this is where all of the goodness is happening. So anytime I've been like writing something or trying to figure out how something works or what's coming or what the rationale is, like what's the use case for this? Like, how are we supposed to put this? Like, that sounds cool, but how am I supposed to use this? Probably 90% of the time the answers are here in the working group. And yeah, fantastic resource. I can't wait for some of this to be like codified, I guess, into more official documentation, because I think they've got a really good jumping off point. Anything they write that's based on this is going to be really, really strong. So welcome to those of y'all who have just joined. It is an episode of UI Mondays. As always, 2 o'clock. This is my week. I believe Alyssa is on next week. And then we've got some joint episodes coming up after that. But today's just going to be, honestly, a pretty chill episode. It is Monday. I am dragging a little bit. We're going to talk React 18. We're going to update the Kendo demo. And we're just going to hang out. The other thing, for those of you who have joined recently, might not have heard at the beginning, tomorrow the Code It Live team is doing a charity stream from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be raising money to help aid the people of Ukraine. So if you are available, come hang out with us. We will be talking about the human side of software. And we've got a bunch of cool guests, a bunch of really great discussions that are going to be happening around like empathy and the way in which you approach software development from a human perspective. So you won't want to miss it. Come hang with us. Come support a good cause. Back to React 18. So I spent a whole chunk of last week catching up on React 18 goodness, because as soon as we knew that the RC was coming, like as soon as it dropped, it was like, all right, anything I've been putting off, it's time to get with it. You can kind of skate through like an alpha release, a beta release. There's a little bit of like, oh, we know it's coming, but it's not like urgent yet. Like, it's not here. Things are still changing. The RC, it's pretty much done. Like, all the features that are going to be in React 18 or in the release candidate now, and we're just weeks away from a final version. So I did kind of a crash course, if I'm going to level with you, in React 18 last Thursday and Friday, because I was like, all right, back to it. And it was honestly really, really cool. I watched a bunch of the videos from React Conf, which I, again, had every intention of watching live, and you know how it goes. So I caught up on those, caught up on a bunch of these discussions, read a bunch of blogs, and put together a list of like the big takeaways of stuff you should know about React 18 that's coming. So we're going to chat through those today. The first one that I thought was really cool was how much they talked about React being design focused. And it was something that obviously resonated with me. If you hung out with me before, read any of my writing, you know that I'm like super passionate about design. That was where I started as a designer and have kind of, over the course of my career, migrated over to the dev side. So to see the focus that the React team is putting into supporting designers and supporting the design process through their framework was really, really cool. And I thought it was interesting because I think it's something that we kind of vaguely know, like that React is the more design-oriented framework, but I don't know that I could have told you exactly how, like before this. I think I probably would have told you it was just vibes. Like that React just attracts a more design-oriented crowd, but I couldn't have told you necessarily how or why they do that. But Andrew Clark gave a really great keynote at ReactConf 2021. And in that, he really spoke about the ways in which React's APIs are really rooted in design principles and not necessarily in programming principles, which makes React feel a little bit different. And I think we see some of that because like when I talk with other people who code in Angular, before this job, I had a job where I was working in Angular. That was just the tool set they used. And so I learned how to do it. It wasn't my favorite, but I couldn't have, again, like put my finger on why. And now it's like, oh, React came very naturally to me when I sat down to start learning it. I mean, there were certainly parts I struggled with, but overall it felt like it just kind of clicked in a way that Angular never truly clicked for me. And I think a big part of the difference is that React is so design oriented and is based on some of those design principles and that method of design thinking, and that made it easier for me to grok. I think it also kind of closes the gap a little bit. We talk about that a lot, especially on Dev by Design, which happens Monday mornings, 10 a.m. Also with me, but more design focused. Come hang out. But I think that idea of like the handoff or the gap, the difference between like design teams and development teams is so often because the tools are like opposite sides, right? Like what you're designing in looks so different than what you're coding in and what your code looks like. And the React team has been really vocal about trying to close that gap a little bit and making it so that the code you write in React is more of like a one-to-one alignment and match with the designs that you're getting. And I think it's really true. It talked about that React is super human readable. The idea being like you could start at the top of like a component, a React component, and read your way down, and it would make sense. You could like see what was happening in that component. And I think that's true for well-written components. Lord knows I've written some that are not that readable. But they kind of work in the same way that like you could look at a design and you could skim through and like take in the wireframe and see what's happening and kind of immediately have that at least loose understanding of like, okay, this is what this is supposed to look like. And I think a lot of that also comes from just the declarative nature of React, the way in which you're saying, you're telling, you're specifying what the UI is supposed to look like. And that's the focus. You're focused on the output on the UI exclusively. And that's another one of those differences because React is technically just a UI library. Like we talk about it like it's a framework and it's kind of a framework, but it's not really a framework in the same way that like Angular is. It's a UI library. And that's that's okay. I think, in fact, it works really well. But I really enjoyed that kind of focus on design. And it was really cool to me to see that the React team is thinking about that really seriously and putting a lot of intention and thought into how they're architecting solutions, I would say, to fit well. Yeah, Andrew in the keynote said, with React, designers and developers speak the same language, that kind of like component-based, easy to read, declarative. I think it just makes sense. And there's no one in the comments to fight me. So I'll go ahead and say, I think React makes the most sense. And that's why I enjoy writing it. The next big thing that I want to call out from all of this React 18 learning is the idea of concurrency. Like, concurrency is going to be the buzzword in and around React 18 because it's so crucial to so many of the great new features that we're getting. Concurrency is kind of a behind-the-scenes capability that is going to power a bunch of the features coming in this update. It's behind Suspense and the new APIs like start transition, use deferred value, all of that is at the root concurrency. And really at a high level, concurrency just means that tasks can overlap. So rather than previously where like one state update would have to fully complete before React could be like, cool, got that information for you, on to the next one. Now with concurrency, we're going to have this ability to prioritize those state updates in a way that we didn't before and like bounce back and forth between multiples. So like hit the pause button on one, go grab something else, get that update, come back, continue this one. It won't be linear in the same way where it would be like, all right, one update done, update 2, great, update 3, great. We might be able now, or we will be able soon, to say like, all right, we started this update, but actually now the user has hit another button and this update is more important. This stuff is old. We don't need to fetch this anymore. We don't need to complete this. We could just like, done, don't need it, throw it out. We can jump around between more urgent and less urgent tasks in a way that is going to make the user experience just a lot better. And we're going to have, as developers, more control over that rendering prioritization and that kind of order of tasks than we did previously. I'm really excited about that. Next, let's talk a little bit about Suspense. So Suspense is interestingly named, I think. And I kind of get why, because they're talking about this idea of just like, again, kind of hitting that pause button on what's going on and holding certain things back while everything's complete. We talked about earlier that one of the things that feels like React-y, one of the things that's really nice about React is how human readable the code is. So like it's pretty easy if you are a new developer that just joined a team, you don't know like anything really about the code base that you're working with. You can open a file and you can read the code like just top to bottom and pretty quickly understand what's happening in that component. It's one of those things that's like JSX, as we all kind of know, is like a double-edged sword. And there's things that are really nice about it, and there's things that will drive other people crazy. One of the things I really like about it is that it does make things like super, super readable, and that your JavaScript and your HTML all meshed in together, which to me makes it a lot easier to skim through components and figure out like what the hell's going on. It cracks me up though, because like it drives Alyssa a little bit crazy. And I get that because in Angular, it's so separate, right? Like this idea is like your template over here and like your JavaScript over here, never the twain shall meet. So, but with React, it's all mishmashed together in JSX, which makes things like super readable. However, that doesn't always hold up when we're like fetching data or when we need to handle data. Some of that ease starts to kind of like slip away. So in the past, we really had to resort to like data fetching libraries, things like Apollo or like React Query. They give us APIs and hooks that let us like skip the complexity and get back to that like top to bottom kind of Sorry, I got distracted by the comments. So let me do the comments. Pi Day today. Are we spinning the color wheel? I'm not 100% sure what you mean by the color wheel, but happy Pi Day. I'm glad you're here. Yeah, dissing Angular. I'm not dissing Angular. It's just not my jam. I respect Angular from a distance. I wrote it for like 2 years. I feel like I've tried it. I'm good. Yes, batch updating is part of React 18. We are going to talk about it in just a hot minute. So yes, hold your horses, but yes. Oh, I see. Pi, circles, wheels, circles. We got it. I came full circle on this pun. That was my bad. I wasn't in a pun place. I was like halfway through React 18 talk and my brain was over here and I was like, color wheels. But yeah, I was talking about that a little bit this morning. We had a guest on Dev by Design, which was really fun. That was the first time we've had a guest on that show. And it was great to be able to talk to Vinod, who came out and talked about UX design and everything. We had a whole sidetrack where we talked about Pi. All day since that conversation. I've been craving Pi. I don't think I'm going to have a chance to like make any, but I don't know. I'm jealous. I should have planned ahead. I wasn't thinking about Pi Day. Ha ha ha. I know that was just for the pun, but also React. It's just me. It's just me this week, not Alyssa. So we're taking it over. We're taking over UI Mondays. It's just going to be React Mondays for today. Anyway, we were talking about suspense, right? Where React was superhuman readable, except when we had to handle data, when we had to fetch new data. And that was kind of breaking down all of this like great top to bottom readability that we had going on. And so we were turning to like data fetching libraries, Apollo React Query. We were using their APIs and their hooks to like get back some of that simplicity and not have to do it ourselves. React 18 is going to fix some of this though, which is really nice. Because even with that, there were still some other problems to deal with. One of the big ones in React that that we struggled with was this idea where like the UI data, like the presentation data and the loading state were kind of like stuck together, right? You basically had to create like an is loading thing, a piece of state for each thing and have that be like, is loading true, false. And then when you're writing your JSX, that had to be tied kind of intrinsically to whatever you wanted to load. So you could go run a quick check like, hey, is this thing still loading? Like if it is, don't load this yet. If it's done, okay, here's the component that I wanted you to load. And it wasn't like, yeah, here, hold on. I've been talking a lot. I should show an example. Whoop. Can I share my screen? Oh yeah, here we go. Yeah, Angular is the best. We're all entitled to our own opinions. That's okay. It's okay for you to be wrong. This is a safe space for you to be wrong. Joking. Angular is totally fine. I mean, my real opinion, as much as I like to get on here and like crack jokes, my honest opinion is that they're all tools and each tool is going to be more or less suited to different jobs, right? I think Angular is really good for like big enterprise level kind of applications that are, yeah, it's just, everything's got a different answer. React is super design oriented. It's very UI focused. Angular is a full framework, right? And React is a UI library. They're just different tools. As a designer, I really like React. I think its focus on the UI is really intuitive. It makes a lot of sense to me. I think the way that it structures itself makes a lot of sense to me. And then, yeah, there are some things that it's not great at, right? So React's Achilles heel is the state management. Yeah, mostly I would say because that's not the primary problem that they are solving. Like, and again, like maybe I'll just get taken down. I'm just here to spout hot takes with no one to stop me. But yeah, I think that's part of what comes with not being a full framework, is that when you want some of the capabilities of a full framework, you need to pull in an external library in React. And so you end up with things like React Redux and stuff that help handle like the state management problem. So yeah, depends on your goal, depends on what you're trying to do, depends on what your app needs to do, depends on what makes the most sense to you and how you think about code and how you think about application structure and 20 million other things. That's a very boring hot take to be like, it depends. That's my real opinion. My fun incendiary opinion is React is better. So, you know, do with that what you will. Chad ban incoming. No, I promise I don't take out my wrath on the chat. I like having you guys around, even when you disagree with me. Perhaps especially when you disagree with me, because that makes the conversation more fun. Anyway, I was sharing my screen. So yeah, here's some example of like previously the way that we would kind of, oops, clicked in the wrong place. The way that we would kind of handle like loading in React. And you can kind of see what I'm talking about here with like the way that the is loading, like the loading state is so directly tied to the UI here, right? In that you got to check and see like, well, if it's done loading, then go ahead and load my component. If it's still loading, then I want this like spinner, right? Not super, super great. But with Suspense, we're seeing something like this. Yeah, I am showing code previews from the blog that I wrote because I'm lazy. And this was the fastest place I knew where to find them. So, yeah. But yeah, so with Suspense, we'll be able to use these Suspense components and designate fallbacks. And as you can see here, it's not necessarily, like it's not intrinsically tied to that one piece of state the way that it used to be. Like it'll be able to check and see whether data is ready, right? And load conditionally. And if not, we're able to specify this fallback right here in the same component, in the Suspense component, rather than splitting things out, kind of the way we did before. I love this idea of the fallback component. I am super, super excited about it. I think it's going to, again, kind of close that gap between the way things are designed and the way things actually happen, right? Because when we think about like the design of a page like this, it would probably be like a skeleton style thing, right? You probably get like a page that loads and you see like the outlines of all the elements, and then when it's done, it fills in. And we're pretty used to that pattern, like that UI pattern. But that's not how the code looks, right? The code actually has like two different elements that are rendering conditionally based on the state of the loading. So this update with React kind of, that's what they're talking about when they're talking about like closing the gap or like bridging design and dev so that they're speaking the same language. We're now having this one component that works exactly the same way the designer is kind of imagining it. Like, all right, here's a component that does this when it's not loaded, and then it transitions into this when it does. That's so cool. That's so cool. Like, amazing. And it's going to make it a lot easier also to like rework the UI of various pages, right? Because we can just add new Suspense components, sometimes even nested inside of other Suspense components. We can move elements into or out of those Suspense components to quickly rearrange the page layout. And if like data changes or elements change, or like we're loading more things based on some data but not on others, we don't have to do that kind of juggling act that we used to have to do. Because the components themselves aren't inherently tied to that loading state the way we used to do it. It really separates like the UI code from the functional code in a way that prioritizes the design experience. How many layers of suspense can you have? We're just upping the suspense. It's like that scene in Rocky Horror where it's like, I see you shiver with anticipation. No, I don't know if there's a cap. I've seen examples where we have suspense components nested. I think I've seen examples like 3 deep. I don't know if there's a cap, like how far you can go before you start probably to see like performance implications rather than anything else. But now I'm curious. We'll find out. I am sure someone will know pretty immediately after React 18 drops. Someone will try. The other neat thing that is coming with React 18 that we can do with Suspense is streaming server rendering. So server rendering itself is a technique where you render the HTML output of your React component and then send that over to the client before the JavaScript is like totally ready, so that the user isn't stuck staring at a completely blank page, right? It's that kind of skeleton-ish approach to the UI. Before React 18, this kind of happened in like an all or nothing way. So when all the components were ready, the page would update and then the user could start interacting with the application. But realistically, like all of the components probably need different stuff and they're loading at like different rates. So you'll have some stuff that's ready before other things, especially if you have like one really big component, which is often the case, right? You have like one really big data grid or like one super big like interactive chart or something that needs a bunch of data and is taking forever to load, and that component is creating a bottleneck. But now with Suspense, in that kind of same way that we talked about before, we can wrap that one slow component in Suspense tags, and that tells React, all right, just like save this one, delay this component loading, focus on all the other ones, send those down. In the meantime, throw that like loading animation as a fallback. So we get those other like littler components in an interactive way. The user can start actually interacting with them and like using the application before that one like mega component is done. That's super handy. You don't have to wait and then like get everything at once. You can start to show things as they're ready and then stream the rest, which makes a whole bunch of sense. Now, batching, which someone had asked about earlier. Yes, there it is. Another great thing that we're getting in React 18 is automatic batching, right? So previously, batching happened when you had multiple state updates within a single event handler. So if you had things in an event handler, then React knew it would wait and only re-render once at the end of the function. So not like every single time that the state changed. So that would be something like if you had a fetch, right? And then inside you were like, set my loading, set my data, set whether or not there's an error, right? So you're doing like 3 state updates within that one fetch call. Previously, or before, even now, let me try that again. Previously, only in those kinds of event handlers, it would wait, right? And it would like screw everything together. Now updates are going to be batched like that automatically, regardless of whatever they're wrapped by. It doesn't have to be in an event handler. It can be in whatever. If it sees a group of state updates all together in one function, it's going to wait unless you actively tell it not to wait. That's awesome. It makes a big like performance impact. It makes your code a lot more efficient. It prevents unnecessary re-rendering of the page. I can't think of an example right now of a situation where you would like want all those different re-renders. I'm sure there's one. There's always an edge case somewhere, right? Where it's like, no, actually, I want 6 consecutive state updates and I want the page to re-render that many times. I can't think of why. Someone probably has an example. So batching is going to be really handy in that regard. Just things are going to get faster and they're going to be more accurate. I think that's really nice. Also, yet still more to come. There's so much React 18 updates. We're getting some new APIs. There's a few for library owners that I'm not focusing on. So if you're writing libraries for React, I know there's some other ones out there. For the average developer, we're getting start transition, use transition, and use deferred value, which are all, again, concurrency-based APIs that are going to allow us to kind of designate things as more or less urgent and update kind of the rendering order and the flow, which is super nice. So let's start with start transition. When we're using start transition, what we're doing is kind of marking our less urgent actions as transitions, and we're telling React to let other more urgent stuff take priority in the rendering timeline. this one I thought was really interesting, especially because I saw a comment in the working group that mirrored like exactly what I was thinking when I first read this. Someone was like, transition sounds like animation-y. So like, what gives, basically? And I agree, like that's not a term that we have heard a bunch outside of animation, right? Like CSS transitions and stuff. And the idea, it turns out, is kind of to lay the groundwork for some animation stuff coming to React, which I'm hyped about. But it's not here yet. It's not in the 18 release. But I was encouraged and I was excited to hear that they're already kind of thinking ahead about more support and more like native, I can't come up with another word other than support. More native built-in support for handling animations in React. So that's exciting. But for right now, setting aside what may or may not be coming based on the word transition, this is, in and of itself is a pretty cool update. It's going to make things feel snappier, more responsive. It's going to reduce the work that we as developers were putting in to try and like fix that. So we can wrap these slow, less urgent updates in start transition and just tell React, like, don't sweat it. It's cool. Like, you can go grab those when you have a minute. Don't press yourself. There's other stuff that's more important. You could come back. Like, that basically just means that in the same way we were kind of talking about with concurrency, where it's not like 1, 2, 3, right? Like, if we mark something as super urgent, we kind of allow it to like jump the line in the order. So React can throw out just like whatever, those unfinished, now updated like rendering things and jump right into the new high priority stuff. Which means realistically that we won't end up in situations where we are losing time, or we're re-rendering a page for a component that's not accurate anymore, or we're showing the user data that's not really correct anymore because the stuff is updated, or like they went and like some user clicked like update, you know, and it hasn't gone through yet, and so they're still seeing the old stuff. Don't have to worry about that anymore because we can bump new state actions to the front of the line and throw out the stuff that's no longer accurate. Awesome. And then, since your whole page is not going to be locked up anymore waiting on those long processes, your users might not even realize that things are like happening in the background. For that reason, they've included with React 18 this use transition hook. That includes an is pending value. So that sets is pending to true while your transition is rendering. That means you can do like a quick check of that like is pending to determine whether you need to adjust your UI to reflect the fact that that update isn't quite ready yet. If we had that update button, hypothetically, we could check is pending, and we could toggle our button between being active and being disabled based on the state of that, so that users like couldn't just, you know, re-click until one was completely done if that was something that we wanted. Or we could just keep letting them click and keep bumping each new one up to the front of the line forever and ever. The other one that's really cool that we are getting is use deferred value. Right? So the use deferred value API is going to allow us to select specific parts of our UI and intentionally defer updating them so they don't slow down other parts of our page. So this is kind of similar to the like streaming server rendering, except not doing like the server rendering part. This is just us being able to say like, put a hold on that component because it's chunky, right? That allows us to have that control over the rendering order, and it also gives us the ability to show like old values instead of just a loading animation or a gray box. Because with use deferred value, we can tell it to just like use what was here already until we get the update. And that's one that's, I think, going to kind of depend on what you're building, right? So if it's really, really important that you only are showing completely accurate data all the time, then you might want that loading thing instead, right? You might want to say like, hold on, we're getting you like the newest, most accurate stuff. We don't even want you to see this old stuff. New stuff only, please wait. Whereas sometimes it's okay, right? Like if you have information that's just a minute or two outdated, that might still be more useful than no information at all, depending on the context. I like that we kind of have this option now where we can say like, well, this isn't life or death information, and it's better to have something than nothing. So yeah, like use deferred value. Or we can say like, no, this is actually, this is crucial information. We don't want you to see that old stuff. We want to wait. You know, we want to use like suspense with a fallback instead. Awesome. So cool. Again, I know I've been like talking about like, it's design focused. I sound like a crazy person. But this to me is just one more way in which it seemed super clear the way they were talking about React being design focused. And during the keynote, this feels like one more way where that makes so much sense. That feels UX minded to me. Much of like, okay, what is actually best for our user? What do they need? And yeah, well, there are these two kind of situations and we should support them both. We should think about what the end user is going to want out of React applications and give developers the tools to make those choices and make them easily and quickly. So there's my soapbox. Ooh, what is Next.js? Is that related to React? Yeah, so Next.js is a framework, and it kind of sits on top of React. Trying to find the example that I wanted. It's kind of, yeah, they call themselves the React framework for production. So it's got like some of the like server rendering stuff. Some of that's coming to React 18, but it wasn't there before. Next.js did that. It's got TypeScript support. It's got some of the bundling stuff that, again, like we're starting to get. It's kind of like the TypeScript to JavaScript situation. So like things that, or maybe like Sass to CSS is a good kind of thing. It extends what React can do, and like just makes it a little bit easier. So yeah, it is related to React. You don't have to know it to write React. You don't have to use it in your React applications. It's another one of those kind of, depending on what you're trying to do. Like you might not need Redux every time, but you might make your life easier. So I hope that answered your question. It was kind of a general. I don't know that I did a super great job of answering that, but yeah, it extends the React library to do more stuff. All right. That's where I was. There's only a couple more things, and then we will be through the entirety of the React 18 changes, and I don't even know that I will have a bunch of time to. I was thinking about doing some updating my Kendo demo app, but I think I won't have time because we're already at like almost 50 minutes. So we'll get through the last couple pieces of what to know about React 18, and then yeah, Next.js is like React, but more complicated. Kind of ish. I mean, I guess technically in that there are more tools, but in some ways it makes things easier. So it depends on your definition of complicated. I know it's just a joke. Anyway, the next thing to take note of in React 18 is that the syntax we used previously to like hook your application actually into the DOM is changing. So we used to use the React DOM.render syntax. So you would say, you know, React DOM.render, you open get element by ID. Don't do that anymore. Nope. Now we're using React DOM.create root. And it's actually a really like small change in terms of, it's like a single line of code that you have to update in that like index file where you're hooking your application into the actual DOM. And again, don't ask me how, but somehow this change supports some of the new features that are coming. So if you don't update that piece, then it will still work. Like you can update React 18, you can neglect to change that, and your application will still function, but you won't be able to use any of the new stuff. None of the new like concurrency suspense features. So it's a very easy update. So there's no reason really to update to React 18 and then not update that like 1-2 lines of code, but just FYI. And kind of in line with that, the way I was like, well, you can update it, it won't break anything. That's actually true for like the entirety of this update. All of React 18 is entirely backwards compatible, which is something else that I thought was really, really nice. So when you update, you won't have a bunch of breaking changes that you have to confront first. You can just kind of roll with it. And the way that works is because all of these new, all of the like concurrency stuff and like whatever, all those features are opt-in, right? So you have to designate something as using those new concurrency features. It won't just automatically apply. Because they're all opt-in, all of your old code is still totally fine. Like, you can upgrade and do nothing, you know, upgrade and then update that DOM syntax and then do nothing else and be fine, be totally functional. Trying to think. Oh yeah, so there's one other thing worth mentioning. That's that if you were kind of tuned in to the React space in and around like right after like React 17 was released, you might have heard some things going around about concurrent mode. That was the old way that they were talking about the groundwork for some of these features, right? So React, like test versions, like beta versions and stuff of React used to have what was called a concurrent mode that you toggled like on or off to support concurrency features. That doesn't exist anymore. There is no concurrent mode, just concurrent features. The React team has said that like, I don't know, so many times. I think that's interesting and really smart. It plays into this whole backwards compatibility thing, again, because there's no like switch to flip. There's nothing that's like at a high complete application level, right? You're enabling these concurrency features on really a component by component basis based on what you need and what you're using. So it's really okay to have like one component that uses concurrency stuff and like 5 others that don't, or whatever. They're all opt-in. You have to go out of your way to declare an action as a transition. If you're using like set transition, for example, nothing will be set automatically. Your existing code won't be updated. React 18 will still handle all updates as urgent by default. So it'll continue that like, you know, set update stacking that it did before, unless you use concurrent features to tell it otherwise. So I think that's really nice because it means you can go ahead and update and start working concurrency features into your new stuff without having to go back and set aside time to update and debug and whatever, all of your old code. I think that was a very realistic approach, honestly, because not every team is going to have time to go back and do something like that in order to update. So that was a lot. That was a big rundown. Let's see. Speaking of concurrency, I heard JavaScript is getting threads. Did I hear wrong, or is the world becoming even more messy? I don't know. I haven't heard this. I've heard that there's some discussion about JavaScript getting types, kind of TypeScript-ish. Let me see. I'm going to Google it. JavaScript. I don't see any like big, again, that was just a quick Googling. Oh, what? I assume the what was around the types. Yeah, there's something on Twitter where they're basically reopening an old like feature request where they are considering it. Let me see if I can actually find the tweet that was discussing that. There it is. Yeah. Here's my source. I promise I'm not just talking. Yeah. Could we have TypeScript with no build stuff? Could we have types in JavaScript? Maybe. Exclamation point. So, yeah, there's an official proposal out now for type support in JavaScript. So interesting read. I've used TypeScript a little during that dark period of my life when I was writing Angular, and I think it would be nice. Follow the chair when Python got type annotations. that's interesting. Told by Python people for years that types just get in the way of productivity. Suddenly it's good. That is interesting because I have not heard that particular opinion. Mostly when I talk with people about types, they are all kinds of excited about it. Think it makes things like super clean, super organized, makes your like debugging easier because you're less likely to write bugs in the first place. Everyone I have spoken to personally raves about typing, and the only like downside is that it's not native, and so there's extra like build steps and stuff. I personally am lazy, so I haven't been using types in like the demo app or anything. I'm not using TypeScript just because that was one more dependency that I would have to install and one more thing that I'd have to worry about. And I was just like, yeah, it's just a UI component demo. It's not like if I was making like a real, like an app that like dealt with people's data and stuff, or if it was super complex, I would use TypeScript. But yeah. So the TLDR of that is that I haven't written types in years. And syntax for types, but the runtime ignores it. Yeah, I'll level with you. I have not written a Python. I don't know anything about Python. Yeah. I think it would be a nice update to JavaScript. Personally, I think that would be handy to have just built in and to not have to do that extra step of like, yeah, dealing with more build things and using more whatever's to keep. So that's the worst part of development in my mind, is like keeping libraries and packages up to date and like dealing with just anytime I have to deal with like npm installs and stuff, like bleh. So the more is built into the native language, the better, in my opinion. So better than encoding it in comments. Yeah, that's true. Agreed. I don't think I have anything else to say about that other than like, yep. But yeah, I think that's probably it for today, y'all. We blitzed through everything new coming in React 18. At least at a high level, a good summary of everything to look forward to. I am very excited, obviously. I think it'll be really nice to have such a feature-heavy update after React 17 was the new feature update. And I think that a lot of what's happening here with concurrency is laying some really interesting groundwork. I'm excited to see where we go from here. I'm excited about that little tease for React like animation support and stuff coming with the like transitioning things. I'm just excited. I'm excited, and it's been a long time coming, and they've put a lot of work into it, and it's going to be so good. So that is it for UI Mondays today. I will see you guys tomorrow, hopefully. Have a lovely afternoon, evening,